Americans for Fair Taxation presents the Weekly Chairman's Report, written by Steve Hayes, President of Americans for Fair Taxation, and recorded by Bob Paxton, a volunteer with the Florida Fair Tax Educational Association. And now, this week's Chairman's Report.
Hello, I'm Bob Paxton with the AFFT Chairman's Report for Friday, April 24th, 2020. Generalities and the Internal Revenue Code. Now, one of the things that nearly everyone agrees on is that some laws are needed to allow us all to live together. For example, few people would disagree that speed limits in a neighborhood with children save lives. However, imagine that instead of seeing a sign that said speed limit 30 miles per hour, the sign simply said no speeding. Well, now when you drive through that neighborhood, how fast can you go? If you're driving 30 miles per hour and you're stopped by a policeman who gives you a $150 ticket for speeding, what do? Well, you could go to court and tell the judge that you were only doing 30 miles per hour and that's not speeding. But the policeman tells the judge that you were speeding. Without a clear definition of exactly what constitutes speeding, the judge could decide either way. The point is that no speeding is such a general statement that it can be interpreted in many different ways by different people, and all would have some basis in logic. The policeman could have a reasonable basis for believing that 30 miles per hour was speeding. You could have a reasonable basis for believing that you were not speeding, and the judge could have a reasonable basis for his or her decision one way or the other. Now, when you factor into this the cost of having to go to court to assert your innocence and the fact that the judge might be more inclined to believe the policeman instead of you, most people would just pay the ticket. Now, in that case, you'd likely be very upset about what you consider to be an injustice, but the blame would not lie with either the policeman or the judge. The ones responsible for the entire situation were the legislators who passed such a ridiculous law in the first place. Before long, there would be so many protests that the law would have to be changed so that everyone would have a clear understanding of what constitutes speeding. Now, how does this apply to the Internal Revenue Code? Now, while people would not tolerate a speeding law as general as the one outlined above, they do tolerate the same type of generalities in the Income Tax Code. An April 1st, 2019 article in the Tax Advisor entitled Exploring the Undefined Trade or Business pointed out the following facts. The term trade or business is one of the most widely used terms in the tax code. It's generally defined in Section 162A, though it has never been thoroughly defined. And the lack of a precise definition has led to numerous court cases and IRS rulings. Now, the following is from the IRS site under Trade or Business, quoting, "A trade or business is generally an activity carried on for a livelihood or in good faith to make a profit. The facts and circumstances of each case determine whether or not an activity is a trade or business. The regularity of activities and transactions and production of income are important elements, but you do not need to actually make a profit to be in a trade or business as long as you have a profit motive. You do need, however, to make ongoing efforts to further the interests of your business," end of quote. Under part-time businesses, quoting again, "You do not have to carry on regular full-time business activities to be self-employed. Having a part-time business in addition to your regular job or business also may be self-employment. Example, you are employed full-time as an engineer at a local plant. You fix televisions and radios during the weekends. You have your own shop, your own equipment and tools, and you get your customers from advertising and word of mouth. You are self-employed as the owner of a part-time repair shop," end of quote. Now, the above contains many generalities that can be understood differently by different people. Just what does good faith mean? What does profit motive mean? What does ongoing efforts mean? Let's say you're working to create a software product that will compete with Facebook. Now, while this seems like a very difficult goal, you can believe that you are operating your business in good faith, even if others might think it was impossible. An IRS agent might look at your activities and decide that you're not operating in good faith, that you're actually using your alleged business to purchase things like computers, internet access, cell phones, printers, and other items for personal use, and deducting the cost of these items from your income as business expenses. The IRS disallows all of these business deductions and makes you repay the income taxes you saved. Revenue Ruling 99-7 takes 8 pages to discuss when driving to and from a taxpayer's residence might be deductible as a business expense, but it doesn't provide a clear definition. Instead, it merely gives some examples. Now, the Federal Internal Revenue Code is full of these types of general rules that are subject to interpretation. Now, this is one of the reasons that tax professionals love it. They use that imprecision for the benefit of their clients. And it's also the reason that the rest of us who are trying our best to comply with the tax code despise it. In conclusion, the courts have ruled that before people can be convicted of a crime, they must have the mens rea. Now, that's a Latin phrase that generally means that a person has to know that their actions were against the law and that they intentionally did it anyway. Now, even though the IRS can do things like seize homes and other assets if they find that your interpretation of a business deduction is different from theirs, you are guilty until you prove yourself innocent. Now, this creates a huge problem for most of us. We don't have the resources to challenge arbitrary IRS rulings in court, and it's almost always less expensive for a business to just pay. No wonder the Internal, and some people would say Infernal Revenue Code, is almost universally hated. It has over 4 million words that actually define almost nothing and are incomprehensible to almost everyone, including the IRS agents delegated to enforce it. Money Magazine used to have an issue where they gave accounting firms who specialized in federal income tax preparation hypothetical income and expense data on a married taxpayer and asked them to prepare a return. No two firms ever agreed on the amount of federal income tax their hypothetical taxpayer owed, and sometimes the difference between the highest and lowest amounts calculated from the same hypothetical data was over $40,000. Now contrast this with the fair tax. Now, yes, there may be some disagreements over whether a particular purchase qualifies as a legitimate non-taxable business purchase. However, there will be no argument over how much money you made because the fair tax is only paid when people purchase new goods and retail services. Now, does anyone think there will be many disputes with the definition of new or retail or goods or services? Former President Clinton could have been speaking for all of us who are forced to live under the general definitions that abound in the Internal Revenue Code when he famously responded to a grand jury question.
It depends upon what the meaning of the word is.
Yes.
If is means is and never has been, that's one thing. If it means there is none, that was a completely true statement.
Wow. While bureaucrats and some highly paid tax professionals seem to delight in the kind of complicated and convoluted reasoning used by President Clinton, most of us don't have the time or the interests. If the people who write this tripe want to interact with others who enjoy these word games, they can have regular meetings with them, but don't impose your idea of fun on the rest of us. Raise money for the federal government in a simple and fair way, the fair tax. Now, if you're ready to take back control of government from a small group of corrupt people and regain the ability for all of us to prosper, go to fairtax.org and join us. Then, contact your members of Congress and the President and demand that Congress pass the fair tax, the only truly fair tax.
This has been the Weekly Chairman's Report, written by Steve Hayes, President of Americans for Fair Taxation. Check back every week for news and information about the fair tax and learn why the fair tax should replace our antiquated federal income tax system. If you'd like to receive a copy of the Chairman's Report in your inbox every week, sign up at fairtax.org.